Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome from Amsterdam to this last regular press briefing in the context of recent public health emergencies. Over the past 3 years, we organized about 30 regular press briefings for the media, plus a couple of ad hoc briefings on specific topics, in particular following the evaluation of the first vaccine candidates or when we wanted to provide information on findings resulting from our safety monitoring activities. Since COVID-19 is no longer a public health emergency of international concern, we will no longer hold these regular briefings. But this does not mean that our work has stopped. As the virus has not disappeared and is still infecting people in Europe and across the globe, we are continuing. My name is Marie-Agnes Heine, and I'm the head of the communication department at the European Medicines Agency. I'm happy to present to you the 3 speakers for today. I'm welcoming EMA Cook, EMA's Executive Director, Dr. Marco Cavalieri, the Head of Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy and Chair of EMA's Emergency Task Force, and Dr. Georgi Genov, the Head of Pharmacovigilance. We will use the briefing today not only to give you an update on the latest developments regarding COVID-19 vaccines and treatments, and share with you details on the planned updates of COVID-19 vaccines, as well as some information on Mpox. In addition, we will provide you with a broader reflection on EMA's response to the pandemic, our achievements, and some of the lessons learned. Today's briefing is broadcast via YouTube and Europe by satellite, and as always, you can use the footage free of charge. I'm now handing over to EMA's Executive Director, EMA Cook, who will focus on the challenges and learnings from the past 3 years. EMA, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Marie-Agnes. And thank you to all of you for being here, and a warm welcome from me to EMA's final press briefing on the COVID pandemic. So like so many things, we started these press briefings during the pandemic to deal with an unprecedented need for independent, unbiased, scientific information straight from the source. And with our press briefings, we wanted to make visible the science behind the vaccines. We wanted to provide clarity on EMA's role, and we wanted to support your work as journalists to bring you the latest news on vaccines and treatments by offering you a direct exchange with our experts. And over these last 2.5 years, leading EMA experts, including Georgi and Marco here, have worked incredibly hard to explain to the public how EMA ensures that EU citizens have safe and effective medicines and vaccines of high quality in which they can be confident. And our communications colleagues, Marie-Agnes in particular, have provided the framework and leadership to make these events happen. So a big thank you. So press briefings are not really natural or comfortable places for most scientists. But over the course of the pandemic, we have learned how important it is to keep communication lines open and ensure that science and science-based information gets widely shared with the public. And between the 2 scientists we have on the table today, they've probably answered hundreds of questions, and I would like to recognize their work, but also the work of other EMA colleagues during this unprecedented period. These are our frontmen, the public face of much of our work in this area, but as you know, there are many other experts who work hard behind the scenes, both at EMA and across the member states. I would also like to recognize the role of the media during the pandemic. So without you asking questions about vaccines and science, without you following up on citizens' concerns, writing articles, the public would be less informed about the process of approvals and the role of the medicines regulators, and we would have been less able to maintain the trust in our work. So this is a good moment to reflect on our role. These last 2.5 years have been the most exciting and rewarding times I have witnessed in my 35-year international career in medicines development and regulation. EMA is different today from the agency that entered the pandemic, and it's no exaggeration to say that this event has permanently changed the agency and its way of working. A crisis on this scale forces you to think differently. And at EMA, we recognized early on that we couldn't stay within the formal boundaries of our mandate as the virus engulfed Europe. And over the course of the crisis, we assumed a range of new responsibilities, which became part of our extended mandate in March 2022. This was an important feature of our pandemic response. We learned to be more flexible and agile in the way that we work, and we looked for what we could do, not just what we were required to do, and we did both. We did what we could do, and we did what we were required to do. So we pulled together the best expertise we had in our regulatory network to speed up our decision making. We fast-tracked scientific advice, we accelerated vaccine approvals, and we collaborated with EU partners to help roll out the largest immunisation programme in European history. And we also collaborated internationally in unprecedented ways. 8 COVID vaccines, 8 new therapeutics authorised, 2.4 billion doses distributed to more than 166 countries, of which almost 1.5 billion doses were delivered to Europe. And it has been estimated that in the first year of the pandemic alone, COVID-19 vaccines helped save almost 20 million lives. And let's not forget the heightened focus on the monitoring and safety of these products, nor the review of new manufacturing sites and revised formulations and shelf life information, all as the new vaccines were being rolled out. So as Executive Director, I'm immensely proud of these achievements and deliverables. For me, the lessons learned from COVID are very clear. We can achieve so much more when we collaborate effectively. When we work together, we can overcome barriers, both real and imagined. People know more about their medicines. They knew that they helped them get them better or prevent them from getting sick, but they didn't necessarily know about the rigorous checks and balances needed to ensure that medicines are safe to use and of high quality. I believe they know a lot more now. Fundamentally, we need the public to have faith and trust in how medicines are authorised and to have confidence in their safety and efficacy. And this is one of our responsibilities. But the trust we place in medicines regulation is only going to be good as the trust we have in science. So how we communicate science to people is incredibly important. And any gaps in our communication have consequences. And while this press conference marks the end of our regular updates, questioning science and public health strategies through misinformation will continue. And if the need arises, we will hold such briefings again, and we're also considering setting up more focused press briefings on other topics from time to time. So we're grateful to you as media representatives for your commitment to continue to report about science so that science-based information retains its place in our public consciousness where it belongs. Please rest assured that we're still here to answer your questions, to support your work and provide reliable and scientific information. So thank you very much, and back to you, Marie-Agnès.
Thank you very much, Emer. So I'm now handing over the floor to EMA's Head of Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy, Marco Cavalieri. Marco, over to you.
Thank you, Marie-Agnès, and thank you for this opportunity to talk to you today. Let me start my last regular update on COVID-19 by pointing out that while the emergency phase of the pandemic is over, EMA's work continues. The SARS-CoV-2 virus is still widely circulating and new variants are emerging. This virus is and will remain a threat, especially for the most vulnerable. COVID-19 caused and continues to cause a significant strain on public health systems, especially during the winter months when transmission of the virus comes on top of other seasonal respiratory illnesses. This means that public health authorities will have to keep their guard up. COVID-19 vaccines remain our best option to protect people against hospitalization and death. I want to echo a point that Emer made. Vaccines really kept people out of the hospital during the pandemic, prevented serious consequences and saved lives at the end of the day. There is no single public health intervention that had a greater impact on COVID burden of disease than vaccination. Without COVID-19 vaccines, we wouldn't have had the success we had in overcoming the pandemic, and they will continue to be key public health interventions in the months and years to come. EMA is working closely with international partners and industry to take stock of the evolution of the epidemiological situation and define how to adapt authorized vaccines in time for the upcoming autumn vaccination campaigns. Global alignment on vaccine composition is extremely important for a worldwide cohesive response to COVID-19. And for this reason, we recently hosted a workshop under the auspices of the International Coalition of Medicine Regulatory Authorities, the so-called ICMRA, to agree on a common way forward to adapt the vaccines to the emerging variants. It was reflected that although the currently authorized vaccines continues to offer protection, this is diminishing over time as new virus variants are emerging. So there was broad agreement among regulators that vaccines to be used in the upcoming winter season in the Northern Hemisphere should include only one virus strain, and that this virus strain should be from the XBB variants, which are recombinant viruses within the Omicron family. Updated vaccines could be used for single-shot revaccination and with 2 free doses primary series depending on the vaccine for young children below 5 years of age who have not yet been exposed to the virus or previously vaccinated. Similar considerations are also included in a statement elaborated together with colleagues from the ECDC that is published today. We confirm in that report that a monovalent vaccine, including an XBB strain, is recommended for the update of vaccines to be used in the vaccination campaigns in the autumn. XBB 1.5 is considered as a reasonable choice to increase the breadth of immunity also against XBB descendant lineages. Vaccine composition containing other XBB strains, for example, XBB 0.1.16 that now is spreading in certain part of the world, could be considered as well if justified. It is also noted that the approval of the updated COVID-19 vaccine should be based on manufacturing and quality data supporting the change of strain only for those vaccines for which there has been clinical trials with different vaccine composition and for which, therefore, we have evidence to show that the vaccine, no matter which strain is included, behaves as expected, both from a safety perspective and in terms of the immune response it can generate. As the timing of recommendations to update vaccine composition has an impact on some platform technology that require longer time for manufacturing than messenger RNA vaccines, there is willingness in the future to provide recommendation a bit earlier, for example, in April or May at the latest. However, we should not forget that the pace of mutation in the spike protein of this virus will be a relevant factor to consider when deciding the appropriate timing of strain selection for updated vaccines. It is acknowledged that not all vaccine platforms might be able to provide updated vaccines for the autumn. As always, the collection of post-authorization data, including data on vaccine quality, effectiveness, immunogenicity, and safety, will be expected. The joint statement with the ECDC also summarizes consideration for the next vaccination campaigns in Europe. Similarly to last year, the priority target for revaccination are people at risk of severe disease, such as adults 60 years of age or older, immunocompromised individuals, pregnant women, and people with underlying medical conditions. Healthcare workers should be considered as well. Decision on the vaccination campaigns in individual member states will be taken by the National Immunization Technical Advisory Groups, the so-called NITAGs. They will take into consideration some key factors, such as the epidemiological situation, the evolution of the virus, the availability of vaccine, and other factors at national level. At EMA, we will continue to work also on therapeutics, and will, in particular, monitor the landscape to see if there are new antivirals, possibly easier to prescribe, or monoclonal antibodies which target new variants that could be used to improve the protection of the vulnerable. As chair of the Emergency Task Force, I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the members of the task force and the EMA staff who contributed to the immense efforts required to make available effective and safe vaccines and therapeutics. The ETF discussed approximately 270 therapeutics and 80 vaccines over the course of more than 250 plenary meetings held during the public health emergency. The task force, however, will continue its work now to be prepared for any new emerging threats and to ensure a timely and efficient response to these threats. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to give the floor back to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Marco, for this update. Last but not least, I'm now giving the floor to EMA's Head of Pharmacovigilance, Georgi Genov, who will reflect on the safety monitoring of all COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics carried out at European and national level during the emergency and today. Over to you, Georgi.
Thank you, Maria-Agnes, for giving me the floor. I'm happy to provide you with a brief overview of the work that EMA and the national competent authorities of the EU member states did to ensure the safety of COVID-19 vaccines. We knew that to fight the pandemic, the vaccines would have to be rolled out quickly across the EU, and therefore we made sure that we had enhanced safety monitoring in place. Our work started before the vaccines were authorized in November 2020, when we put together a comprehensive safety monitoring plan that would guide us in analyzing the enormous amount of data that we were anticipating from vaccination campaigns in the EU. We placed extra obligations on the vaccine makers and encouraged people who received the vaccine and healthcare professionals to report suspected side effects to make sure we had prompt access to the largest amount of safety data possible. Vaccine makers had to provide us with detailed reports on the safety of their vaccine every month for at least the first 6 months after authorization. 56 monthly reports were assessed by our safety committee right up until December 2022. Our focus was not only on monitoring, but also on transparency regarding the results. We made sure that the public was kept informed. To that effect, we published 50 monthly safety updates to provide an up-to-date overview of the safety profile of the vaccines. Given that nearly 1 billion vaccines were administered in 2021 and 2022 in the EU, our system for collecting and analyzing information on suspected side effects, called Eurovigilance, received 1.7 million case reports for COVID-19 vaccines from healthcare professionals and people who received the vaccine in Europe. Together with cases from the rest of the world, we had received a total of 2.2 million case reports, almost 4,000 every day. If an unusual pattern emerged, our safety committee, the PRAC, performed an in-depth analysis of the reports to quickly identify potential safety issues. This work entailed long working hours, accelerated procedures, and I want to thank our safety committee, national competent authorities, and EMA staff for their commitment. The COVID-19 vaccination campaign was the largest and most global vaccination effort in history. As a consequence, the knowledge accumulated on the safety of COVID-19 vaccine to date is immense. The available data confirm the safety profile of the COVID-19 vaccine and add to the evidence from clinical trials that supported their authorization. What did we learn from this unprecedented amount of data? Most of the side effects of the vaccines are mild and short-lived. Serious side effects are very rare, occurring in frequencies below 1 in 10,000 people vaccinated. The EU pharmacovigilance system showed that it is capable of detecting and managing emerging safety issues quickly. An example that all of you might still remember is the detection of new syndrome, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia, or so-called TTS, associated with adenoviral vector COVID-19 vaccines. This new risk was picked up and evaluated by the EU regulatory network first, ahead of any other regulator in the world. This allowed us to introduce measures to minimize risks. Last month, WHO declared the end of COVID-19 as a public health emergency of international concern. But our work does not stop here. EMA and the EU network will keep monitoring the safety of COVID-19 vaccines and therapeutics continuously, as we do for any other authorized medicine in the EU. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to pass the floor back to our moderator.
Many thanks, Georgi. We will now take questions from the floor. And dear colleagues from the media, as always, please raise your hand if you want to ask a question and turn on your camera. When I give you the floor, we will unmute your microphone and you can then ask your question. So looking at our list of journalists, I see that Helen Collis from Politico has raised her hand. Helen, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I also want to thank you for hosting the press briefings throughout the pandemic. They've been a real useful source for us as journalists. A couple of questions on the statement that you put out earlier today on COVID vaccines. There's a mention in there that monovalent vaccines will now be a reasonable approach for vaccinating people. But the previous position has been to go with bivalent vaccines. I just wondered if you could give us some context there as to why we're moving back to monovalent vaccines and not going with a broader spectrum in the new vaccines. And also on that, I was wondering if you could tell me which companies are already engaging with the EMA to provide adapted vaccines under these new guidance for this year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for this question. The first one is monovalent versus bivalent. And Marco, I hand over that question to you.
Yeah, I think we looked into the evidence that has been emerging in the meanwhile. And if you remember last year, we were concerned about where the virus was going and we wanted to keep broad, so having a vaccine that could allow maintaining really breadth of immunity. But what we learned is that individuals that have been repeatedly vaccinated with the ancestral strain, so the one strain, and then maybe naturally exposed to the new Omicron subvariants, they already have good immunity against all the viruses that have been circulating in the past. But this immunity is not very good. It's what looks like is coming up next. And that's the reason why we really felt that we needed to move away the immune response and try to trigger an immunity that is more directed against these new subvariants that are dominant at the moment, like the XBB family, so that we can increase the chances of having good protection, not only from severe disease, but also from infection and mild symptomatic disease.
Thanks, Marco. And perhaps you can also answer Helen's second question that was about the companies we are engaging with on the adapted vaccines.
Of course, we have been discussing with all of them, all the companies for which we have vaccines approved, but it's not a mystery that particularly the messenger RNA vaccines company are eager to look into adapting their vaccines for the next vaccination campaigns. And it was released also today that Novavax similarly will be looking into adapting their vaccines. Other companies may decide to do so, but I think this is still a bit unclear at the moment.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Reuters, from Maggie Fick. Maggie, please.
Hello, my question is for Dr. Genov. As we know, there will be a number of product liability court cases over alleged health damage from COVID-19 vaccines, with people likely to be suing BioNTech and AstraZeneca for damages. We were wondering, what do you think are the hurdles to proving causality in court?
This is kind of a difficult question, but if, Georgi, you want to give at least a little bit of background probably on the safety profile of the vaccines.
Yeah, in court, I cannot comment. I have no experience, but I can tell you how we approach a causality assessment for safety issue for COVID-19 vaccines and any of the other medicinal products authorized. So we do monitor closely all data that emerges. We have on one hand, spontaneous reports. What I mentioned earlier, these are reports from people that have received the medicine or have been vaccinated, as well as from healthcare professionals. We collect those in a centralized database and we closely monitor the reports. Now, there's also information that we take into account from clinical studies and any other pharmacoepi studies that might emerge. So causality, depending on the adverse event, could be a challenging issue, and taking all the available information into consideration is key. And having quick access to that information has been key during the COVID-19 safety monitoring. The number of issues, and I probably should not go into details that need to be considered, but to establish causality, there are confounders. So the many factors that can contribute could be the vaccine, the medicine, but it could be medical condition, could be co-medication, and a number of other considerations. So it is a science looking at the totality of the data, using also statistical methods and careful review of reports. So I won't go further into details, but it does require a scientific, careful look at the totality of the data. Over.
Thank you very much, Georgi. Now we take a question from Ulrich Quistgaard from MedWatch. I think that's a Danish outlet. Ulrich, please.
Yes, that is a Danish outlet. Thank you. I would like to ask how the amount of vaccine candidates for COVID-19 has developed lately. Are they all disappearing, or are the companies still trying to develop new ones in the same pace as earlier? And how big do you assess the need is for new vaccines in this area that the existing ones cannot fulfill? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ulrich. If I understood correctly, it's about the pipeline of vaccines, and probably a question for Marco, please.
Yeah, indeed, we are a bit of a transition period. Many of the developers that put a lot of efforts during the pandemic or at the beginning of the pandemic now are rethinking about their strategy. So it's not surprising that we may see some developers going out of the race or not continuing with developing and try to market COVID-19 vaccines. However, at the same time, we are seeing that a lot of developers are trying to work on new vaccines that could provide added benefit compared to those that we have now. For example, we all know that the current vaccines, the protection that they confer is not really long-lasting, particularly for symptomatic infection. And also that their impact on transmission may not be as good as we want it to be. So that's why many of the developers are trying to focus to fill the current gaps in having vaccines that could address some of the public health benefit, which could be, better protection from infection, better ability to block transmissions, and probably more long-lasting protection, including from new variants. So the concept of variant-proof vaccine is still there as an important one. Then there is another layer that still some developers are working on, which is the concept of preparedness for new coronaviruses. So having vaccines that could be panzerbocoviruses, for example, so able to protect against any new beta coronavirus that might spill over from the animal environment and animal reservoir into humans. So yes, there are still developers that are looking into options and particularly try to fill all these gaps in terms of the current armamentarium.
Thank you very much, Marco. Now we have a question from Danny Kemp from AFP. Danny, the floor is yours. Danny, do you hear us? Obviously not. Perhaps we can take another question before that. I have a follow-up question from Helen Collis from Politico. So let's go to Helen. Helen, please. We can't hear you.
That's better, thank you. Given this is our last pandemic press briefing, and we have EMA Cook with us today. EMA, I'd like to ask you, on reflection of the whole time with the EMA during the pandemic, if there was one thing you think in hindsight could have been done differently or better at the agency, what would it have been?
EMA, for you.
Well, I think we did a lot of things very well, so let me start with that. And I have to reiterate my appreciation for all my staff and the experts in the network who worked so hard during this time. I think we also had unprecedented collaboration across institutions with ECDC, with the Commission. I think there are areas we have to work on more. One of the areas that I often highlight is it's in the communication area, and it's how we communicate better in lay language and also in local language. Because as you see, we're here today and we're all speaking English, and we're trying to speak in lay language, but it's only our trained people who have been able to do so. So we still need to do some work there. I think the other area, and it's also in the communication area, is our relationship with the National Immunisation Technical and Advisory groups. where we have a network. We have to build our collaboration even more with them. And then the final area, I'm sorry, I know you only asked for one, but the final area I'd like to point to is the area of the fragmentation of clinical trials that we saw particularly in the therapeutic side. So a huge amount of clinical trials initiated at the early stages of the pandemic, but very few of those leading to meaningful results for the patients or for the patients who needed them. So that's something that we continue to work on, particularly how you can ensure good quality clinical trials at speed in a pandemic or in an emergency situation.
Thank you very much, Emer. I don't see any additional questions right now. So probably we are going to close this last regular press briefing. So thank you very much for your participation today, but also in the past regular press briefings, and your interest in the often quite technical and scientific information we wanted to share. I also want to thank our speakers and experts, not only for their participation today, but also for their availability and commitment to explain our work to the media and to the public in the past 3 years. And in addition, I want to say a big thanks to our communication team, who always stood ready to address your needs and follow up on your questions, and who will continue to do so. And as said at the beginning, this was our last regular press briefing in the context of public health emergencies. But as Emer mentioned, we will continue to organize press briefings on important developments and activities, and you will be invited if anything comes up that might be of interest for you and your readers and viewers. So thanks again, and goodbye for today.